And I want to welcome to the channel, Dr. Anthony Chaffee. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, of course, not a problem. It's good to see you again.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we've met a couple of different times. So I want to say the first time I met you was at the Reversed series.
I think in person, yeah. I mean, we spoke.
Yeah, of course, because we've seen you online quite a bit, and it's been wonderful. And then we were both at Low Carb Denver. So that was really fun. We had some cool people that were like, let's go out for steaks. Let's go out for steaks again. Let's go out for steaks again. So we happened to kind of be in the same, dinner crowd night after night. So yeah, it was a ton of fun. I've enjoyed it so much. Well, why don't you, I think most of the people here know who you are, but I do want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing right now.
Sure. Well, thank you. As you say, I'm an American medical doctor. I'm currently practicing in Australia in my neurosurgical residency, but I've also been very interested in diet and nutrition, how that affects health and chronic disease. So I also have a practice outside of neurosurgery in preventative medicine, functional medicine, metabolic health, whatever you want to call it, where we try to focus on people's overall holistic health. We're not just catching them after the wheels have fallen off. We're trying to prevent them from falling off in the first place. And so we use a lot of diet and lifestyle interventions as well, and try to get people better and get people off medication as opposed to just going on more and more and more medication. And so I've been studying human nutrition and biology my whole life. And I was particularly interested in this because, I always wanted to be a doctor. And also I was, an athlete and wanted to eat what was right for my body to fuel me best during that. And I came about the carnivore diet 23 years ago, just on happenstance, because I learned how toxic plants were and how they had dozens of carcinogens, if not over 100 actual carcinogens. And that, there were far more naturally occurring poisons in plants and vegetables that we eat than the pesticides we spray on them by a factor of 10,000. And that the naturally occurring toxins were 500 times more likely to cause cancer than the pesticides we were spraying on them, according to a study from UC Berkeley by Professor Bruce Ames in 1989. Maybe they've come up with new and better and worse and more horrible pesticides since then. But at that time, that's what that showed. So I was very, very struck by that. And I just said, okay, well, I'm not going to eat any plants. And I just stopped. And so I just started eating just exclusively meat, and I never felt better. I just felt amazing. And I never really thought much about it until probably 5-6 years ago when I saw Dr. Sean Baker on Joe Rogan's podcast. And he was saying, hey, you can get all your nutrients from meat, and people are doing really well with this. And I remember thinking, like, my immediate response was like, oh, well, that's a bit off. That's not what we're taught. And then, a voice in the back of my head said, well, actually, I basically did that for like 5 years in my early 20s, just because I would not eat any plants at all. So the default was meat. I only had meat to eat. And that was the period of my life. I've never felt better. I've never been in better shape. I've never played better. I've never just been better and more healthy. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll check it out. So it's not too far-fetched because I did that for 5 years. I never took a vitamin, never ate a banana, anything like that. My gums weren't bleeding and I felt great. And so I said, okay, well, I'll take a look at it. And within 5 minutes, I could tell this guy was bang on the money. And so I started looking into more and more. And at that point, I was a doctor and I knew about the research in cholesterol and how that was fraudulent and how it was actually not a marker of cardiovascular disease risk. It certainly wasn't a cause of cardiovascular disease, and that things like fructose and sugar, that they were more in keeping with something that was bad for you that you wanted to reduce and lower through the work of Dr. Robert Lustig from UCSF, and which was amazing. I absolutely love his work. And so I had a lot of other things to bring to the table. And so all of that now focused in on like, okay, well, maybe humans are animals. That's just the kind of animal that we are. And like any animal in the wild or in the zoo, if they eat what they don't eat naturally, if they eat outside of their biologically appropriate diet, they get very sick. But what we don't realize is they get all the same things we get. They get so-called human diseases: obesity, heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune diseases. Those are completely abnormal in the wild, in the animal kingdom, unless you feed that animal something that it didn't evolve on, and things just go haywire. And so we notice that in other animals, and we say, wow, these animals are getting more human diseases, these domesticated pets, these zoo animals that aren't fed properly, they're getting so-called human diseases. Well, they're not catching diabetes from us. They're not catching cancer from us. They're not catching rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's from us, right? So it's something that we're feeding them is causing that. And it just happens to be that we're eating the same things. And that's outside of our nature. That's outside of our biologically appropriate diet. And we're getting the same thing. So I started looking at medicine through that lens, that humans are carnivores as a species, and we're not eating as such, and just things just start slotting into place. And I realized that the so-called chronic diseases that we're treating nowadays as the mainstay of modern medicine are not diseases per se, but toxicities and malnutrition, toxic buildup of a species inappropriate diet, and a lack of species-specific nutrition, namely too many plants that we haven't evolved to detoxify properly and safely, and can't extract all the nutrients from, don't even have enough nutrients anyway, and not enough animal meat and fat, which are essential to our life. There are things that exist in meat and animal fat that we have to have that you cannot get from plants, but there's nothing in plants that you need that you cannot get from meat. And so I just came to that realization, and I've been trying to apply these principles into my practice and help people and educate them. And I'm just seeing absolutely remarkable results. It's seeing people reverse diseases that people said are not curable, they're not reversible, and but they are, because they weren't diseases in the first place. I mean, if you look at autoimmune, heart disease, diabetes, cancer rates, autoimmune rates, all these things have gone up dramatically, over 3 times in the last 40 years. Diabetes has gone up by 6-fold, and it's continuing to climb up. All these things are continuing to, get more and more and more prevalent. And people may say, like, well, maybe we're just paying attention, maybe we're missing things. Okay, no, first of all, but even if we were, people made that argument in the 1990s when these started to go up. And so, maybe before that they weren't paying as close of attention, but they were definitely paying attention in the 90s, and in the 2000s, the 2010s, now the 2020s, it's still going up and going up and going up and going up. Okay, so what is that? We're just still not paying attention. You don't have to pay too close attention to notice that you're having bloody diarrhea 30 times a day if you have Crohn's disease. That's not too hard. That's not too hard to catch, right? So, but if this prevalence is going up, that means that that's not an incurable, unstoppable condition. That means that there's something causing it. That means that there's something in the environment that we're being exposed to that's causing this to happen more and more and more to people. And as we continue this exposure, and this exposure gets more prevalent, these so-called diseases will get more prevalent as well. But that also is very reassuring, because that means that there's a reversible nature to it. Because if we're getting exposed to something, we can remove that exposure and remove that influence and heal our bodies. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing people go on an elimination diet, or just a ketogenic diet, and or even a full-blown carnivore diet, and they're reversing these diseases. Clinical trials showing that we can reverse type 2 diabetes by putting people on a ketogenic diet. We've known for 100 years that you can suppress seizures with a ketogenic diet. And now we're seeing more and more that this can help in cancer as well. As there's hundreds of studies in humans showing that ketogenic metabolic therapy in multiple different cancers is very beneficial to help people's survival rates. So the list goes on. So I find that this is something that can probably have such a major impact on people, because billions of people around the world are metabolically sick or unhealthy, and this is something that I think is directly related to the food that we're eating. Excuse me. And just like the prevalence can go up, it can go back down again as well. If we recognize this and we educate people and we let them know, hey, if you remove these exposures and you just start eating the way our bodies are designed to be fed through to our biological nature, then you don't actually have to have these issues.
I love it. And so your approach to it is very scientific based, which is so important. And it's kind of this mental journey of kind of arguing somebody into this, right? Or, not into it, but stating what you've seen as facts. And so what I'm curious about is that people have such like an emotional connection to food, and that's just their celebration. That was for me. That's how they show love to each other. How do you address that when you're working with people? What's some of the truths that you give them that can speak to them on like that journey of changing their entire behaviors? Like, I love everything you're saying, and I agree with that 100%. But there are so many people that could look at a list of 100 studies and say, I want what I want. How do you kind of help them navigate that road what do you see works with people to change their mindset to want to eat this way?
Well, I usually frame it in a very similar way that I've just displayed here, and then that opens the door to a lot of questions. And then people say like, "Wow, I've never thought about it like that." But most of us are taught, even in grade school, that humans are apex predators, top of the food chain. And I was taught that when I was a kid, that humans were apex predators. Apex predators don't graze. Apex predators don't eat salads. Apex predators eat animals. That's the whole point. They're at the top of the food chain. Plants are at the bottom of the food chain. And you don't see great white sharks eating kelp for roughage. Mm-hmm. And you don't see lions eating grass as a mainstay of their diet. So you point this out, that this is just our nature, and that already makes sense to people because this is not a new concept. This is a very old concept that we had a lot of evidence for. And people go like, well, yeah, I mean, humans are carnivore. Like, so many people say that, well, humans are carnivores, and then you get into all the different sorts of narratives that have been floating around for the last 40 years, which have to be addressed. I mean, absolutely. So then they start saying, well, what about cholesterol? Isn't cholesterol bad for you? In fact, no, it's not. And so you go through the evidence for that, and the fact that this is now a matter of historical record, that the sugar companies bought and paid off various professors from Harvard and elsewhere to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies back in the 50s and 60s to vilify cholesterol and exonerate sugar, when it was actually sugar had a very strong correlation with heart disease. And one of those professors was named head of the USDA, and it was he who authored and published the 1977 USDA declaration that said that cholesterol caused heart disease, saturated fat increased cholesterol, stop eating both. And that absolutely changed the world, and it changed everyone's approach to eating. And we reduced our red meat by over 33%, reduced saturated fat and cholesterol intake by about the same, increased fruits and vegetables by 30 and 40% respectively, increased grains, increased sugar, or specifically high fructose corn syrup, tripled the amount of that we are consuming, and tripled the amount of seed oils, over tripled the amount of seed oils and high fructose corn syrup that we were consuming. And in that those 4 decades since then, all of these diseases have become much, much more prevalent, to the point now that there are 90% of Americans have at least one metabolic disease. Mm-hmm. And that's a big deal. Like, that's not normal. And 70% of Americans are either overweight or obese. The obesity rate in America in 1980 was 8%.
Oh my gosh.
After World War II, it was 6%. So it was quite stable. In the UK, it was 6% and 6%. Like, it was flat. And then their dietary recommendations came in and say, stop eating fat, don't eat, limit the amount of fat that you eat, in 1983. And then their obesity rate started climbing up. And now they're one of the most, overweight and obese nations in the world. Same with Australia, same with most Western countries. And others are much worse. The Pacific Islands in particular, some of these have 50, 60% obesity rates, not just overweight and obese, but obesity rates. So it's a very serious problem, and it's really started to ramp up after that. So you point that out. That this was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2016, actual internal memos from the sugar companies detailing this in their own words. We have the contracts. These guys are paid $6,500 in that valuation, worth about $50,000 now. So these guys basically got the equivalent of a Camry to sell out the health of the world, and that's what their souls were worth to them. But so you point that out, you show them the evidence. So this is all published, and there are large studies with hundreds of thousands of patients in recent decades showing the exact opposite of what we've been told this whole time. Go back to the Framingham study, which I was taught in medical school to be this big seminal paper that showed to follow these people for decades, and they said that higher cholesterol levels was correlated with higher cardiovascular disease. Now, correlation is not causation. There's absolutely no studies that have ever shown a causative link between higher LDL cholesterol and cancer and heart disease. But this was a correlation. It was thought to be that this was very strong evidence for that. And the problem with that was that I was actually misrepresented. The Framingham study actually did not show that. It actually showed the opposite. It showed people had lower cholesterol, had worse, disease and mortality rates, and vice versa. So I actually found an inverse relationship. And there are other studies that found either absolutely no correlation, no relationship at all, or inverse correlations, that people are actually healthier with higher LDL cholesterol. The Journal of the American College of Cardiology published in 2020 a very large study looking at all the available data, all the recent meta-analyses, all the recent large studies with hundreds of thousands of people. And before, we have large randomized controlled interventional trials trying to limit and lower saturated fat, and people got worse. They had more deaths. Some of these things had to be stopped because they were harming people. And so, looking at that, they showed that there was look, saturated fat is not actually even linked to cholesterol, or to heart disease at all. There's no link there. There's certainly no causative link, and there's no correlative link either. And if you can't show causation from correlation, but if you show that there's no correlation, that proves there's no causation, right? You can't have something that directly causes something, but they're not correlated, right? So they would obviously have both of those. And so there's no correlation. They found no correlation between increased saturated fat intake and cardiovascular disease. And they also found an inverse correlation with saturated fat and stroke rate. So people that ate more saturated fat actually had lower stroke rates.
Protective.
Yeah, it's a protective. And so if you ate less saturated fat, stroke rate went up. Okay, so that's not good. And there's other studies that actually show, the same inverse relationship with LDL cholesterol and cardiovascular disease. So you just show that, and you first of all, for me, the fact that all of the so-called confirming studies saying that there was this link between cholesterol and heart disease, these all been shown to be fraudulent. People like Ansel Keys was a fraud. He was bought and paid for. And then people say oh, well, we know that, he was bought and paid for these particular cholesterol studies, but all the other stuff he did was great. How do you know that? How do you know that? He was on the payroll of these people for decades. We know that. So why would you trust anything? Why would you trust anything this guy put out there? I mean, I certainly don't. And so when you have a theory based on, false information, and you show that, and it's predicated on false information, you have to throw it out, and you have to start over again. Okay, so we'll throw those out and we'll start over again. Well, the overabundance of literature now and studies now show that there is no link between higher levels of LDL cholesterol and heart disease. A couple of good studies for that actually, in practical terms with real people, was they looked at 140,000 people who had heart attacks in the United States, and they found that of those 140,000, it was a dead even split on who had high LDL cholesterol and who had low LDL cholesterol. It was dead even. So there wasn't any correlation.
Neutral. It's a neutral event. Whatever your LDL has zero implication.
It was completely random. It had nothing to do, completely unassociated, right? But they also followed up. So there are two studies about that size. And one of the studies, they followed them for 2 years. And of course, their doctors say, you got to get your cholesterol down. You got to get your cholesterol down. And people with low cholesterol, you got to get it down even more. And so they found that the people that lowered their cholesterol down into so-called normal ranges, and the people that already had them down in normal ranges, were 2 times as likely to die within those 2 years than the people that maintained a higher cholesterol. So, this has no correlation and no association with heart disease. And yet we're also finding there might be actually a protective measure here that, we make LDL cholesterol, or, the carrier protein for cholesterol. It's actually essential. Like, we make this for a reason. It has a purpose in our bodies. And so, you start messing with that at your own peril, and people have been paying the price for that. So, that's quite shocking to people, but the evidence is there, and, you can send them that, you can show them that, those papers and that literature. And then they say, then they ask the other questions about, like, well, what about nutrients, and what about fiber, and how do you go to the bathroom? But these all have answers,
Yes.
and so you start that out, you frame it in that broad sense, like I did. And then that opens the door to a lot of questions. And then you just address the questions. But all these questions have answers, and they all have evidence for them. And in very practical terms, it's you can just see how your body works. And they say, like, well, you need fiber to go to the bathroom. It's like, and there's reasons why that's not true. There's that fat that drives your digestion and keeps things soft and moving. But the fact of the matter is that if you do it, you will find that, there's no problem. In fact, things are better, right? So it doesn't matter what a study says. It doesn't matter what an expert says. If you're doing it and it has the opposite result, well, they're wrong. That's just how it works. That's what the physicist Richard Feynman said, was that it doesn't matter how brilliant your theory is, and it doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with the experiment, it's wrong. And so you do this in your daily life, and it works when someone says it won't work, or it doesn't work when someone says it will work. Well, something's off, right? And so, so that's generally how I approach it. Is you just address these it's usually the same things. And this is why I started making these videos, to address these particular points and these particular concerns that people have. And I can say, okay, well, here's this research. You can just look at it yourself.
Absolutely. Pointing to the research. And I love that these questions are asked over and over again. To me, that's like an encouragement. That's like, people are curious every time, when we're in a call or we're in a meeting and these questions get asked to me, I'm like, this is so good. This is an honor to answer this for the 100th time and the 1000th time, because it's making a difference in people's lives. I want to know about some of the examples that you have seen lately or overall of some of like the biggest transformations or some of the biggest wins that you have seen with people doing a 100% carnivore diet. I'm just curious about that.
Well, we see a lot of chronic diseases go away, and then because
disappear.
And they or go into remission or whatever you want to say, but they're not having the symptoms, they're not having the problems, they don't have to take the medication. So especially autoimmune issues, these things just melt away when you remove that exposure. And there are a number of different studies that have actually shown that relationship with things like Crohn's disease, where if you put people on, and there's a controlled trial, we had people that was on a diet that they took out carbohydrates and fiber, and controlled that with a group that did not take out carbs and fiber. And if you're on a ketogenic diet, you're not eating any carbs, there aren't too many plants that don't have carbs and don't have fiber. Plants are made of fiber. So what are you eating after that? You're eating meat, basically. And so that study showed, and they're eating other stuff too, but they limited the carbs and the fiber. So they found in that study that the people that took out carbs and fiber with Crohn's disease stayed in remission on average 51 months. So that's over 4 years, which is right. And then the people that didn't stay off the carbs and sugar, just eating whatever, and fiber, that they stayed in remission on average 0 months, right? Not a lot of months. And so there's a big contrast there. And then there's the other studies that have looked at elemental diets where we have these things for people with seizures as well. It's sort of just this powdered stuff. It's just the nutrients, has no carbs or anything else. And so they just have this shake. It's very highly processed, but it's just the nutrients and nothing else. And it doesn't have carbs. And you put these people on that. And that was a better treatment for an acute flare-up of Crohn's than prednisone or prednisolone, these steroid it's like a big immune suppressant. So that's the mainstay. That's a gold standard for treating autoimmune disease flare-ups is prednisone generally. And, and just not eating certain things was a better treatment than these heavy medications, which have huge side effects as well. And, I've practiced and seen people that were on this stuff and they're like, yeah, this is the only thing that controls it. But you're on this and you're in your blood work and your magnesium, electrolyte, and all these sorts of things, they start getting out of whack because it's not perfect nutrition. And there are sort of micronutrients, if you want to call them that maybe we don't know about yet. You're not quite getting, but a steak has everything. It has absolutely everything that you need, portion that you need it. So that's a perfect elemental diet. That's a perfect elimination diet. And
we don't have to come up with a chemistry lab and make some gross powder and pump that in, right? We've got it right there.
Exactly. Yeah, but that's proof of concept that there is something that we're eating that is triggering these issues, right? And you just remove those things, right? Now maybe you don't have to remove everything, but there seems to be a lot that is triggering. But if you remove enough of that stuff, these things go away, right? And that's very easily done by going on just a meat and water diet. And so I see a lot of that. I see people with Crohn's disease in particular, having bloody diarrhea 30 times a day, right? Which is horrible. And they're in horrible pain. They have other sort of issues manifest throughout their body as well. And within a couple of weeks, their symptoms are dramatically reduced, if not completely eliminated. And then after a few months, they get a biopsy and they don't even find any sign of disease or inflammation. And their doctor's like, oh, that's crazy. How did that happen? And so they're in remission. They're in official remission. Rheumatoid arthritis, we've actually been treating that with a pure red meat and water diet since the 1800s with Dr. Salzberg.
Wow.
And this is in the literature. And there's books written on it. And as recently as 1975, there's a book written by Dr. Vogtman, who's a gastroenterologist who argued that humans are carnivores. And basically, if you don't eat plants, you won't get these diseases and you won't have to, there won't need to be gastroenterologists, right? Mm. And then 1977 came and they said, well, meat and fat is bad. And they just threw out, 100 years of medical literature and knowledge. So, which is a bit crazy, but I'm seeing people now with rheumatoid arthritis that it's going away. They're coming off methotrexate. They're coming off all these big, heavy, nasty drugs that are very harmful. They get them out of, they stop the progression of rheumatoid arthritis, which is great because it's a devastating illness, just destroys your joints and cripples people, if this goes on unchecked. But they're very, very, very heavy drugs that can cause serious problems long-term for people and short-term. And so they're getting, people are coming off medications. They don't have to rely on these things and they don't ever have to deal with flare-ups and have to take prednisone. And so that's really life-changing. I was literally just walking in my neighborhood a couple of days ago, and one of the neighbors just sort of recognized me and said, "Hey, Dr. Chaffee." I'm like, "What?"
Right.
Yeah, and he just came up to me and said, "Hey, I watch your videos and I really like them." I was like, "Wow, thank you. That's very flattering." And he was saying that he had rheumatoid arthritis, but he was doing so much better now. And from the sound of it, he was saying he had it for 17 years and now he was doing really well. I was very fit, very muscular and lean. And I was like, this guy's thriving. This guy's doing great. And so that's great to see. In practice, we see a lot of people lose weight as well. Some people will come to us because they're having problems with their weight. And so we have people have dramatic weight loss. There was one kid who was, he was just in his early 20s, and he was morbidly obese. He was extraordinarily overweight, probably, around 300 pounds and like a slight, probably a 5'6" or something like that. Wasn't very big, but very, very, very heavy. And, after, a while, probably a year or so, that came all the way down, and he was, down slim, trim, not much body fat, started, putting on muscle. It looked like two different people when you look at these and after pictures. Like just one person, like you wouldn't recognize them, but literally were able to take off, like 150 pounds of excess body fat, and skin came right down. Didn't have like baggy skin or anything like that. And this was a guy. Now he's muscular and fit and trim, and he's more confident, and he's able to go on dates and things like that, and not feel very self-conscious and things like that. So that was great as well. And then I was speaking to someone the other day, and they'd been vegan for 12, 15 years, something like that, and they were extraordinarily unwell. They were basically almost died, and they had to be in the hospital like a few times because they were so sick. And eventually they said, okay, I can't do this. I have I have things to live for. I need to do something. So they started eating meat again, and that just revitalized their life. And they started eating more meat. They went carnivore. And after 1 year of being carnivore, they early 40s, and they've got osteopenia. So their bones are decaying. Right, that shouldn't happen premenopausally, certainly. But she was extremely unwell for a very long time, and that was reflected in the bone tissue as well. So she was osteopenic, and 1 year in carnivore, and now she's still osteopenic, but it's starting to regrow. So she's actually putting on bone density. It's going towards that green zone of normal bone density. Well, don't think that can happen without medication. The medication is not great anyway, and it's very problematic. But that's something people say, yeah, when you just build up bone and then you start losing it and you never get it back. Well, that's not. You can revitalize your tissue and regrow these things. So I was very, very happy for her. She's starting to this is objective proof and evidence that her body's better and her body's recovering from these years of harm that were caused her from her diet. There's another gentleman who was vegan, and then raw food vegan and raw fruitarian and things like that, was in these different communes, and he was getting worse and worse and worse, and he was getting so sick and so unwell that he at one point didn't have the strength to work his phone, couldn't get out of bed, and he was just basically. And he was doing everything the way that all the different proponents of a vegan diet said that he should do it. And this is supposed to give him everything. This is supposed to, give him, the best lease on life and the best health. And of course, that was exactly the opposite. And he was extremely skinny. He's about 6 foot tall, and he was maybe 100 pounds. And and he had direct neurological damage. He wasn't able to use his hands properly, and that could be from a number of different things. One of them being B12. If your B12 levels go too low, which actually is still in the normal range that we call it, because everyone is too low on B12. So even the standard range is actually below that threshold where you can get neurological damage and demyelination of your axons, and just and so he was a lot below that. So he was definitely going to be suffering from this. And he's still recovering. He's started eating meat again. He started feeling a lot better, started doing a lot better. Now he's gone full carnivore more recently, and he's already feeling better and better and better, and having more strength. He's put on 30 pounds of lean body. And he's feeling better day after day. And so I just love those stories, to see people really take back their health and heal from something that's so damaging to them. And we can say that this is better or that's better and all these sorts of things, and there are studies that absolutely show that eating meat is far better than just eating plants. But what really matters is the practical day-to-day application. You have these people who have been vegan long term, and their health is getting worse and worse and worse, and they're doing everything by the book. You have to eat this much of this and this much of this. You have to take these supplements. If you have to take supplements, you know something's wrong. You know your diet is deficient. If you have to take supplements, then by definition, your diet is deficient, right? Because koalas don't take supplements, right? Badgers don't take supplements. They get what they need from what they eat. And so if you're not getting what you need from what you eat, what you're eating is deficient. And so they are deficient. And so they're taking these supplements or doing these sorts of things because their diet is deficient. And they're still getting sick and they're still having problems. And they're being told, well, you're just doing it wrong. You're not doing it right. Okay, maybe, but all of them, every time, there aren't too many people that are long-term vegans that certainly don't take supplements. Like I don't know of any long-term vegan that don't take supplements or don't eat some meat sometimes, or eggs or something like that sometimes. So, that's why you have to have these nutrients from meat. They're required for life. And if you don't have them, your body can go along for a while because we're pretty amazing creatures, but eventually we'll catch up. And so, seeing these people that do everything by the book and do everything right, and then just go, I'm not healthy, and then they switch back from it and they just start eating just a natural meat-based diet, which is what we've been eating for millions of years, or since creation. But since the dawn of man, we've been eating meat and areas, exclusively meat. There was not many plants and shrubs and berries available during the ice ages. How many yams were available when people were crossing the land bridge from Asia to North America? None. So living the way the Inuit are now, exclusively on meat. And if you're not thriving during an ice age, you're dead. All you have to do is look up all the different failed polar expeditions, and these are very well stocked, very well equipped, experienced people that these are just extraordinarily harsh conditions, and they died. A lot of these people died because they're so intense. We thrived during this. That was day to day, maybe not as extreme as at the North Pole or at the South Pole, but that was a lot of the world was extremely bleak and ice covered and blizzards and all these sorts of things, and we thrived. We ended up populating the entire globe, and you can't do that if your diet is deficient and you're weak and you're malnourished and you're getting heart disease and cancer and you're just popping off. It doesn't work like that. So if you're not thriving, if we weren't able to thrive on meat and meat alone, we wouldn't have made it. And so you have these pieces of evidence, and you say, well, we don't have a randomized controlled trial for that. Okay, we don't have a randomized controlled trial that shows parachutes work, but we can see with our eyes that that's probably a good idea. And so we can also, use our brains and realize that there were no plants available in most of these areas during the ice ages, especially, towards the north. And people say, well, everyone was moving towards the equator. That pushed everyone down. People were moving towards the equator. Not true, actually. That's actually the exact opposite of what we see in the fossil record. When the ice sheets were coming down, our ancestors were moving up. We were going up to it, right? And so we were attacking into the cold. We weren't running away from it. And so you can't do that unless you are thriving. And that's where the mammoths were. That's where the megafauna was. And so, that's where we went. That's what we want to eat. We want to go get those things. And so the mammoths, eating that fatty meat, was such an advantage that it benefited people to go up into the ice to go and get it, right? And so that to me is pretty compelling evidence. It's certainly compelling for my own decisions, and thousands of other things that go into this. But for me, all of these things are enough for me to say, okay, well, I'm going to try and also understanding that plants by nature have a toxic element and component, and we aren't perfectly adapted to detoxifying all these things. WHO has a whole web page talking about the foods that we eat that are toxic and have to be detoxified, but they're not perfectly detoxified. And so you still get this low grade exposure. And so you have to sort of limit this stuff. You have to be careful. You don't want to eat too much of the same thing, or else, it can build up. And you certainly have to prepare these things properly. Some of these things, like even just beans, like kidney beans, cook kidney beans, or you don't cook them well enough, 5 of them can put you in the hospital. That's on the WHO website. I'm not saying that. The WHO is saying that.
You can't just grab them out of the bag and eat them like a snack, or
No, not. No. And so, and people say, like, well, we don't eat, legumes that are not prepared. We don't eat bitter cassava that's not prepared and chemically treated and processed. Right. Use the amount of cyanide, which can be fatal if you eat bitter cassava. But that's the point. If you have to put this through a chemical treatment and a process, and you have to cook it, and you have to do these things to denature these toxins, then that's proof positive. That's 100% certification that we are not designed to eat them, because we don't have the biological processes and physiology to break down and detoxify these things safely. We have to cook it. We have to put chemicals and add different sorts of things to denature and try to strip these poisons out of this plant, because we can't do it ourselves, because we are not designed to do it ourselves. Animals that eat plants, some of these things would kill us. Most plants would kill us. And there are animals that eat all those plants, but they don't eat anything else. So they can detoxify those horrible poisons that would kill us, but they can't detoxify other things, and that would be harmful for them. So a giraffe eats leaves, but it eats different leaves than a gorilla. And they eat different leaves than a deer, and they eat different leaves than a panda, and they eat different leaves than a koala, and they eat different leaves than a wallaby. And if you mix those leaves around, they all get sick or die, because food is very, very specific. It's species specific in the wild, and you go outside of that and you get harmed. And so, the idea that we just know better than our own biology is ludicrous. And it's foolhardy, and it's just someone trying to promote and push their own agenda and narrative, and not trying to wake up and smell the reality that what they're doing is harmful, because it's just an excuse. You're like, we do need to live within our biology, that we are constrained by that. And if you think you're not, you'll find out that you are, unfortunately, but it will cost you. It will cost you your health. It will cost you the health of your children. It will cost you the health of your parents. It will cost you a lot more than you realize. And so it's very important to recognize what we evolved on, what our biologically appropriate diet is, and to try to match that as best we can. And now, if you choose not to do that, if you choose to smoke, you choose to drink, you choose to do whatever you choose to do, I'm fine with that. I don't have a problem with people making up their own minds and decisions with their own life. I just want them to have information available and not be misled by people that claim to have their best interests at heart, but probably don't, and probably are just trying to profit and benefit off of this theory and this rationality, and they've based and staked their entire reputation and careers on it, and now they're like, can't back out now, and that's very disappointing. That's one of the things that this is not my day job. My job is in neurosurgery and my practice. And, this takes time away from that. I'm taking 6 months away from neurosurgery. So I'm getting paid a lot less. So my normal job pays me a lot more than interviews and doing videos and trying to educate people and going and paying to fly to different countries to give talks at different conferences and things like that, because I think it's important. Yes. And I think that it can help people, and I see it directly help people. And so, I think that that's worth it to me. It's worth it to me to make less money and to actually pay my own money to try and do this. So I'm not benefiting from this, in that way.
You're causing a ruckus, Dr. Chaffee.
Yeah. Well, good, because someone should shake this stuff up.
Someone should. Yeah,
right?
it has to. And it's
Yeah.
grassroots. And you were talking about traveling and, paying to go different places. And so I did want to ask a little bit about reversed and your experience reversed, some of your favorite elements of that experience were for you. And I think that this is such a passion project and it is grassroots. And I feel the same way. And the more that we can get, our credentialed folks, our folks that have the transformation stories, our folks that have their own way to communicate and to make this approachable and doable. Sometimes there's just like a lot of mental steps that we help break people down with as a coach. But I think that it is very grassroots and it's very anti-narrative. And so, but we have such a passion, and when people get it, and when they have those healing stories that you're talking about, that I've seen over and over, where they get their mobility back, they get the use of their hands back when they couldn't do anything. Those stories really keep me going. But give me some feedback about your experience on the reversed in Costa Rica.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was amazing, and that was something, again, I had to take a lot of time off from work. It was difficult. I had to do a lot of extra overtime and weekends to make up for that, and I paid for it. Like the last month that I was there, after I got back from Costa Rica, where we were there together, I was on call every other night. 10 of us, right? So it should be, 2 people on it at a given night. So it should be really, every 5 days you go on call, and every 5th weekend you're working the weekend. I was on call every other day, every other weekend, right? And so it was just this marathon through until I took some time off, and that was hard. That was hard to do, but it was worth it to me to do that, because I think these things are important. So reverse was excellent. I absolutely loved being a part of that. I was so happy that Charles Maddox invited me to that, and I get to be with you and all the other great people that were there. And we got to work with real people and talk to them and educate them about this, and let them understand how our bodies actually work, and can actually happen, and what is supposed to happen, because the natural state of humanity is one of health.
Mm-hmm.
Be healthy. It's just our base state. You shouldn't have to do anything special to be healthy. You should just be healthy. And we're not. Again, 90% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy, at least one metabolic issue, and 70% are overweight or obese. The rest of the world is close behind or past that, right? That's abnormal. We have never seen that in that level before the modern era. And so being able to work with people one-on-one and in those group settings, and educate them and see the results that they're having, and just how interested they were and how inquisitive they were. And I mean, a lot of these people were like, they're taking notes, and which was great, and they're like, oh, I got to write that down. I got to write that down. And that was amazing. And the results were fantastic. People were getting, they were, one gentleman, I think he lost, 100 pounds, 150 pounds or something like that in a few months of this. One lady was type 2 diabetic, and her HbA1c was like over 12. It was like 12.5 or something like that. She's a
very small person, even.
Very slight. Yeah, exactly. She wasn't obese or anything like that. But HbA1c of 12 is sky high. Yeah. And I mean, it's astronomical. It is very, 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 very unhealthy. We talk about cholesterol and how, oh my gosh, that's going to cause heart disease. Cholesterol has like a very weak association at best. A lot of these studies that show no association, but of the studies that show an association, the recent ones with large numbers of people, and they look at this risk stratification, they show a very weak association, like 1.3 times, risk. And then SDLDL, the damaged LDL that is comes from high blood sugar and seed oils and alcohol and different sorts of things, damaging that LDL cholesterol. That's slightly increased, so it's like 1.7 times, increased risk, I believe. But metabolic syndrome was 6 times the increased risk of heart disease if you have metabolic syndrome. type 2 diabetes, 10 times the risk. And someone who has very uncontrolled diabetes, you're going to be further on down that chain of risk. And so she was extraordinarily high, and her blood sugar and her HbA1c went down to around 5. You know, even going under 5, but it was down normal. It was just plumb normal for a non-diabetic, right? So, and she wasn't taking a bunch of insulin medications. You know, people are able to come off their medications, come off their insulin after being dependent on insulin for years and still having their HbA1c sky high. So just by managing what she ate and just by managing her diet and allowing her body and her biochemistry to work as it is designed to work, she got better and was able to reverse these diseases, which is why the show is called Reverse, because you are reversing these things. They are going away, and hopefully more and more doctors recognize that. There are a lot of doctors I speak to all the time, and you point these things out to them, they're like, "That's amazing," and they want to know about it. And some are just like, "No, that can't be. That's just a fluke. You're going to die of a heart attack," something silly like that. But, you know, a lot of people are being responsible. My mom's doctor was one of these. And when my mom reversed her HbA1c, it was like 9, and then it went down to 6 in 2 months. And she came off her medications. It came off her insulin in those 2 months. And her doctor was like, "What the hell did you do? How the hell did you do this?"
Was she carnivore? Is that how she did that?
She did by going carnivore. Yeah, just 2 months. That's it.
Yeah.
And you know, she said, her doctor said, like, diabetes is a progressive disease. It only gets worse. We can mitigate it and slow it down its progression with diet, lifestyle, medication, but it always gets worse. It never just goes away like this. People don't come off medication. They don't come off insulin. How the hell did you do this? Because no, you know, this was shocking. This wasn't just it's just a fluke. She's just like, "I want to know what's going on here." And so she told her about, you know, what I was doing, and she became quite interested. You know, I went in and spoke with her for like an hour and a half and went through all this stuff. She's like, "Right, okay, well, this is what we're doing now." Okay. And you know, and so, you know, more and more doctors are coming around to this, more and more clinicians and more people, because yeah, you're right, it is a grassroots movement. It's not going to come from the top down. There's too much people being sick. There's too much money in people eating garbage. And so it's got to come from us. It's got to come from this level, having these conversations, and then people listening to it go, "You know what? That makes sense. You know, maybe I'll give it a try." And then they try it and go, "I had no idea. I had no idea I could feel this good. I had no idea that I was supposed to feel this good." And they get angry. And like, "I should have been feeling like this my whole life." I'm angry.
Pretty much. That's the biggest regret.
Yeah.
Like, why didn't I start this earlier? Wow.
That was a thing. I was just going to say quickly, just when we were down in Costa Rica, you know, Bella went through to everyone and just asked everyone, "Okay, what is your biggest regret," or this, that, and the other. And I think everyone said, or close to everyone said, "I wish I had started doing carnivore earlier." That's my only regret, is I wish I was doing this my whole life, because, you know, you just feel so amazing, and your health is just so vibrant. I think all of us, you know, I really wish that I'd been doing this throughout all my school sports and junior high school, college, and things like that. Thankfully, I just happened to come across this when I was 20. And so for a big part of my career, I was doing this, and it was just a different level of athletic performance and fitness. And but I wish that I'd been doing it my whole life. I wish I developed like this. I wish I was, you know, as tall as I would have been. I wish my brain was as big as it would have been, because, you know, on average, our brain size has reduced by 11% since the agricultural revolution. I think that's directly from eating the wrong thing, and our brains don't develop properly. We're not getting essential nutrients that we need to maximize the growth potential of our brain and development of our brain and nervous system. And we're doing things that can detract from that can actually, you know, slow down or you know, impede the proper development of our brain and our body. And that bothers me. I really wish that wasn't the case. I want to know, like, what would I have been? Would have been like my father's father and uncles, born in, like, you know, the 1910s and 1920s. These guys were all pushing 7 feet. these were big, big, tall, white dudes, and they were like, like they're just big guys. And there's 5 of them, and they played basketball since they were a kid. And so like any pickup game of basketball, they had their team, and they just crushed people because they knew they played together since they were kids, and they were all like 6'8", 6'9", 10. They were big men, and and my father is tall, and his brothers are 6'5", 6'6", things like that. And they were eating mixed diets and things like that. So that's in my genes. I was just like, I want this, and I think I should have had that. And but oh well. But there's hope for my kids anyway to be.
That's right. That's right. We're going to feed them well and raise them well. It's beautiful. Anthony, your passion for getting this out is just so inspiring, and your commitment and your devotion and your unending willingness to travel and, record podcasts and come in as guests. And I'm so honored to have you as a guest on my channel. This has been amazing. I definitely want to leave our listeners with a couple of rules. I've heard you talk about your rules. This is why this is my this rule or this rule. Can you quickly give us some rules when people are going along this road?
Well, for me, I think it's as important what not to eat as what to eat. And so, yes, you want to eat meat. You want to eat fatty meat. That's good for us. We don't be afraid of fat. Don't be afraid of animal fat. Plant fats are a different story. They're not great for you. But especially isolated outside of the plant, there's problems there. But meat and fat, that's where you get your nutrition. And fat is, it's not just a calorie source, it's an essential nutrient. There are essential nutrients in there. There are essential fatty acids in there, and fat soluble vitamins. So this is something that we do need for optimal health. But then again, it's important not to eat these other things that can cause harm. So you need to eat the meat, you need to eat the fat, because that's where you get your nutrition. But we want to avoid other things. So my hard rule for myself, and what I recommend to people who want to try this, is no plants, no sugar or any sweeteners of any kind, and nothing artificial. And that goes for sauces, seasonings, and drinks as well. And so I find that that just goes down to just whole meat and water, salt to taste if you want to. And I find that if you do that, that people have the most success and the best health outcomes. And I find that even having just a few, especially little sweeteners, that definitely can impede people's progress. I see a lot of people that benefit in a lot of ways. One lady was saying, she's like, well, I feel so much better. My skin's better. My hair is better. And, I've come off my medications. I don't have these autoimmune issues anymore, but I'm not really losing weight. And that was the main drive for her to do this. But I'm not really losing the weight. And so, so I ended up stopping, but it really sucks because I loved doing carnivore. I felt so much better. My medical issues got so much better, but it didn't work for me. I wish it had worked for me. To me, it sounded like that worked great. That worked amazing. It's just, so don't get to, so look at the totality, look at the benefits as well. Maybe, you have, this, you want to address this thing like your weight, but maybe that doesn't happen so quick. It doesn't happen very quickly for everyone. It happens for a lot of people pretty quickly, but not everyone. And there are reasons for that. People can be massively out of balance in their hormones, especially leptin, and once if that's out of whack, that's a major master controller for the rest of your hormones as well. And so until that starts coming down back to normal levels, and your body sort of heals itself metabolically and hormonally, you might have some difficulty with that. But she was getting a lot of benefit. And then I asked her, okay, what are you eating exactly? Most of what she was eating was meat. And that's what people think is just like, I eat meat. That's what I do. It's a carnivore diet. I'll just eat more meat. But she was also having a couple other things, and she was, having erythritol, the monk fruit sweetener. Mm-hmm. So, and she was just like, well, I wasn't losing weight. Well, that's something that I've seen more and more. People using artificial sweeteners. Well, they're keto, but they can still cause issues, especially with people that are having difficulty losing weight. And so, I think it's very important, if you're in that category where maybe you need to be a bit more strict, to at least give that a shot and at least try it, just meat and just water, nothing else, not even coffee. That freaks people out. Coffee's a plant. And so people ask me, well, what about coffee? Coffee's a plant. Damn it. And then these sweeteners and things like that, which come from plants, right? But they, well, most of them come from plants, some of them are derived from bacteria and things like that. But you just want to eliminate these things. Maybe some people can have these things occasionally. It won't make as much of a difference. Some people are much more sensitive to that. So at least try it out. At least give it a shot and just really just go down to bare bones, just, fatty meat and water. And then after, a month or a couple months or whatever, you try some things back in. At least now you have a clean palate and you can see what it does to you. And you can see, okay, well, I was losing weight, I was doing great. And then I hit a stall. And, that's when I added, something back in. Maybe I was eating more dairy or drinking milk, which has enough,
Ton of sugar.
to spike your insulin and kick you out of ketosis and which is, I think, our primary metabolic state. So, that's what I would do is just, no plants, no sugar, no sweeteners, and nothing artificial. And that's what I find makes me feel the best, and what I find people that I speak to have most success with in their own health.
And the leptin kind of resets over time just with carnivore. That's something about the carnivore that gets that to kind of get to a better spot. Yeah.
And so sometimes you see people with massively elevated leptin, and most ketogenic diets will reduce the leptin. And that's something that we've seen in, when I joined this practice in, preventative medicine, metabolic health, the doctor there had been doing this for 40 years. And that's something that he would always track his leptin. And that was something that he has been using for decades, was just getting people off carbs. And that he's just like, hey, he's like, look, your leptin's really high. You find it very difficult to lose weight. The only way to bring this down is you got to get rid of carbs. And so, they do, and it does come down. Leptin is released from our fat tissue to go to our brain, tell how much energy we have. But it does a lot of other things. It actually it influences so many other things in our body and so many other hormones in our body. And it also is from stretch receptors, is why they said in the 80s, you can eat fiber and that will bulk up and it'll stretch out your stomach, and that will release leptin. Your brain thinks, oh, hey, look, I'm satisfied. I have all this food. Your brain is much smarter than that. And it's certainly smarter than these people, because there's a lot of different receptors in there that look for protein and look for fat. And that goes directly to your brain from your stomach and say, okay, this is how much we're getting here. And, that's enough or that's not enough. And so it's not just the stretch receptors. It's way more complicated than that. The human body is just immeasurably more complex than that. And, so that's one of the things is that, just getting rid of carbohydrates and, which carnivore diet should do, will reduce that. So some people will have, I have one lady who is, she's quite overweight, but she has a number of autoimmune diseases. She has like 4 autoimmune diseases, and she was doing this elemental diet, because she had
the chemistry version of it, not the meat version.
Yeah, exactly. But she'd been doing that for years. That was the only thing that could sort of keep her in remission. So she'd sort of be on that for 3 weeks. She'd go back to eating other things. Her health would deteriorate rapidly. And then she'd go back on for 3 weeks. But she found that she couldn't be on that powder stuff for more than sort of 3 weeks, because it caused other problems. And so she sort of was doing that for years, and her health wasn't great. And she was overweight and she was having other problems. And so she came to the clinic because she, came across my stuff online, and, we got her going on a carnivore diet. She was all for it. She was happy to do that. She was on the elemental diet at that point. She was like, okay, so I'm going to do this reset. I'm going to do this for 3 weeks, and then I'll start going on that, which she did. And, now her autoimmune issues are just gone. She's not dealing with them anymore. So they're in complete remission. Looking at her weight, looking at her leptin, it's unreadable after 100. It's just like, it's above 100. We have no idea what it is. It's way too high. And most bariatric doctors who do bariatric medicine, weight loss medicine, or weight loss surgery. It's typically, it's typically thought that if the leptin is above 100, they will not be able to lose weight on their own. They need surgery. And leptin is supposed to be around 4 to 6, right? So 100 is way too high, and 25 times as much. And hers could have been 200, 300 for all we know. It's just above 100. So if it's above 100, typically bariatric surgery is recommended. But but I see people get better on a carnivore diet. First of all, their health improves dramatically. They feel a lot better. They're coming off medications, and their leptin does start coming down, and you start losing weight. And it's thought you cannot lose weight. Well, this lady lost 4 kilos in the last 2 weeks. I saw her probably last week, or the week before, and in that sort of 2 week interval, she'd already lost 4 kilos. Right, so not 10 pounds. Right, and her leptin's still above 100. Right.
Oh,
Know what it is, but but she's already making very positive and measurable benefits and progress. And so so either way, she is losing weight, it's not as fast as it would otherwise. And in other people, I mean, there's one lady I had, just this week, and she lost 7 kilos in 7 days.
oh
Right.
man.
Losing 2.2 pounds a day, every day. Right. And she was very surprised by that. And, you talk to her, and she was vegetarian, and her daughters are vegetarian. And she's like, look, I like meat, but like my daughters have just guilted me into this, because there's like, oh, how can you eat an animal? All these sorts of things. So she's like, oh, okay. So I've been doing that, but her health was really poorly. And she was just like, look, I need to do something about this. I need to worry about me at the moment. I worry about other things. I'm not well enough to worry about other people and other animals. And so she did that. And and she was just like, she's like, oh, this is very hard for me, and just socially and logistically, because she hadn't eaten meat in a long time, and her daughters are not happy with it. And then we tell her, like, okay, well, hop on the scale, and she's lost 7 kilos. She's like, all right, I'm sticking with this. This is great.
Never mind.
Yeah. And she was saying too that she did feel good.
Yes.
She just, it was hard for her because of these logistic issues. Yep. But then when she saw that, she realized, like, okay, yep, no problem. This is what I'm doing. And because she had not been able to eating low fat, vegetarian diet, no processed food. She's never eaten processed food. She wasn't a big cookie and cake person. She was eating foods, and she was just not healthy, and she was putting on weight. She couldn't lose it, and hungry all the time. And now she's happy, and she's satiated, and she's losing weight, and she's feeling great. And so you do see those things. And so even with someone with raised leptin, they can still lose weight. They can certainly regain their health. That leptin does come down, and it will come back down to normal levels. Absolutely.
Beautiful. Oh my goodness. I love that you have the clinic that you're getting to help so many people, that you can teach this way of eating there, that you're not restricted at this time, that you can, really treat patients and get them on a better path. I just appreciate your time tonight. Thank you so much, Dr. Chaffee. And you are, just pushing this holistic, this healing plan forward. And I remember you've been kind of new to the scene. You've been, maybe a couple of years about there, getting the message out, and it's just been exponential growth. And it's because of the effort and the information, and then the personal pieces. You've got these clients, these patient stories, and you bring it all together and, help people change the world between a carnivore diet. So it's absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you very much for having
me. So we're just talking about healing stories and examples of transformations, and was just curious, what are some stories that have stood out to you?
Yeah. Well, there's one. It was quite heartwarming that I got that I found out about recently. A friend of mine who's a family practice physician here in Perth has deals with geriatric patients mostly, and so one of her patients was an 86-year-old gentleman who wasn't doing well at home, wasn't able to care for himself any longer, and so he checked himself into a nursing home. Basically, his words was basically to die. He didn't have, he wasn't able to take care of himself anymore, and his body, his health was just getting worse and worse. He was just sort of at that point in his life. He was at the end of his rope. I don't know how, but he somehow came across my videos online, and sort of in a last ditch attempt to just sort of save his life and his health, he started a carnivore diet. And within 2 months, he's now back living at home. He's off all of his medications. He's going to the gym 3 days a week, and he's swimming twice a week. and he is back to independence. And he went from nursing home to independent, going to the gym, working out 5 days a week, off all of his medications. That's just one of the most heartwarming stories that I think I've ever heard. And that is the exact thing that any doctor would love to do for their patient. And I don't care what field you're in, what specialty you're in. If you have something like that, you can literally get someone back from a nursing home, back home, independent, exercising, and off medications. That is the biggest win that you can get in medicine, I think.
That's phenomenal. That's thriving right there from a species specific and appropriate food. Amazing.